I paid $2 million to marry a prince. That was every dollar I had ever earned in Hollywood. Every underpaid film, every contract signed while my male co-stars were paid 3 times my rate for the same work. Every dollar accumulated in the 5 years between my first television commercial and my final picture. All of it transferred to a European royal house as the price of admission to a fairy tale. And then, to complete the transaction, my husband banned my films in his country. The work I had given my 20s to, the performances, the Oscar, the 11 films that made me one of the most recognizable women on earth, could not be screened in the place where I now lived. The actress had to be erased so the princess could be credible. That was the arrangement. I just didn't know it when I signed. This is not a story about a fairy tale. I said that myself, in my own words, years into the marriage. I certainly don't think of my life as a fairy tale. I think of myself as a modern, contemporary woman who has had to deal with all kinds of problems that many women today have to deal with. What I did not say publicly, what the palace protocol and the required composure and the 26 years of performed serenity prevented me from saying, was what those problems actually were. The depression, the isolation on a rock smaller than Central Park, the husband who had 3 mistresses within months of our wedding, the scripts that arrived year after year from directors who remembered what I could do and were returned year after year by a life that had no room for what I actually was. The one attempt to come back, a director who had made 3 films with me, 1962, a role I accepted publicly and donated my entire fee to charity, reversed in 3 months by a man who needed the princess more than he needed me. I was a working actress who retired at 26 and never worked again in the way that mattered. I was a woman who paid everything she had for a life that cost everything she had. I was precise and disciplined and genuinely talented, and I spent the last half of my life pressing flowers in palace rooms and giving poetry readings to stay connected to the only work that had ever made me feel completely like myself. The films are in the archive. They will always be in the archive. What I want to give you now is the rest of the story, the part that isn't in the archive, the part that happened after the palace gates closed, told in my own words, without the composure, without the serenity, without the performance, just the account, precise, clear, and long overdue. Let me start with my father, because nothing about my life makes sense without him. He was a self-made man in the most complete and exhausting sense of that phrase. 3 Olympic gold medals in rowing, a construction empire built from nothing, a house in East Falls that he designed himself and filled with children he intended to mold into versions of his own ambition. He was magnificent, and he was impossible, and he made it absolutely clear, in the specific way that fathers make things clear without ever saying them directly, that I was not the child he had invested his highest hopes in. My brother was the athlete. My sister was the beauty. I was the quiet one with the dolls, the one who gave each doll a different voice and invented elaborate scenarios for them in her room. Nobody in that house recognized what I was doing. I was practicing. I went to New York at 17 to study acting, which my father considered a frivolous detour from the serious business of becoming someone's wife. He was not a man who understood that the theater could be a serious ambition for a woman. He understood it as a phase, as a rebellion, as something to be waited out. I waited him out instead. I worked. I modeled to pay tuition, appeared in television commercials, took every stage audition that came near me, and built the kind of discipline that doesn't come from talent alone, but from the specific determination of someone who has been told, not cruelly but consistently, that their particular gift is not the important one. My father came around eventually. By the time I won the Oscar, he was proud of me. But by then, I had already learned the lesson that his early skepticism taught me, that the approval of powerful men is conditional, that it arrives late, if it arrives at all, and that the work itself is the only thing you can actually count on. Hollywood arrived fast, faster than I expected, faster than I was entirely ready for. In 4 years, I went from television commercials to an Academy Award, from unknown to one of the most photographed women in America.
And I want to be precise about what that felt like from the inside, because the outside version, the grace, the composure, the apparent ease, was a performance built on the same discipline I'd developed in my father's house. Inside, it was something considerably more complicated. I had come to success very quickly, perhaps too quickly to understand what it was worth. Because when the prince arrived and the fairy tale offered itself, I was 25 years old and I had been through several unhappy romances. I was feeling lost and confused. I didn't want to drift into my 30s without knowing where I was going in my personal life. The prince arrived at exactly the right moment. That was not an accident. That was the problem. Let me tell you what the golden age of cinema actually paid me, because it matters for what comes next. On one picture, a film shot on the French Riviera, a film that exists almost entirely because of my presence in it, a film whose costumes became iconic within a year of release, I was paid $5,000. My co-star received $18,750. Same film, same billing, roughly the same amount of screen time. The difference was that he was one of Hollywood's biggest male stars, and I was a woman, which in the accounting of the studio system in 1954 was considered sufficient justification for the gap. I did not make a scene about it. I was 24 years old, and I had learned already that making scenes about money was considered ungracious in a woman, and I had a reputation for composure that I intended to maintain. But I noticed. I always noticed. The Oscar came the following year, a role they almost didn't give me because I was considered too young and too glamorous for a woman that unglamorous. I fought for it, quietly, in the way I fought for everything in those years, by being absolutely prepared, by making the work impossible to dismiss, by showing up so thoroughly that the argument against me became untenable. It worked. I gave the performance. I received the award. And I remember standing there holding it and thinking, with the absolute clarity that sometimes arrives at unlikely moments, that I had done the thing I came to do. I had proven the point. And the point, once proven, raised the immediate question of what came next. What came next, as it turned out, was a film festival in the south of France. A photo session arranged by a Paris publication. A meeting with a prince who needed a Hollywood actress the way a drowning country needs a lifeboat. I did not know that last part yet. I did not know that a wealthy associate of the prince had suggested another famous actress first, that my name had appeared on a list of suitable candidates before it appeared in a love letter, that the principality in 1955 was financially precarious enough that its sovereign had been advised to marry a film star as a rebranding strategy. I found all of that out later. At that film festival, I met a man who was charming and attentive and completely focused on me in a way that felt, after years of a Hollywood where every conversation had a subtext and every friendship had a calculation, genuinely rare. I was susceptible to it. I want to be honest about that. I was susceptible in exactly the ways that my history had made me susceptible. Hungry for uncomplicated approval from a powerful man. Ready to believe that the fairy tale was available to me if I was willing to pay the price of admission. I just didn't know yet how high the price was going to go. The engagement was announced in January 1956. The press called it the romance of the century, the fairy tale made real, the Hollywood actress and her prince. What the press did not report What was not considered relevant to the romantic narrative being constructed in real time for public consumption was the financial arrangement that accompanied the marriage contract. I was required to bring a dowry of $2 million to the royal house. $2 million in 1956. I want you to understand what that number represented. It was the entirety of my Hollywood earnings. Every film, every contract, every dollar I had made in the industry from my first television commercial to my final picture. All of it, transferred to a European principality as the price of becoming its princess. I came to that country with my name, my composure, and nothing else that was mine. There was another clause that received even less attention. When I married, I had not yet fulfilled the terms of my studio contract. The studio released me, generously, they said, in recognition of the occasion, in exchange for the global broadcast rights to the wedding. 30 million people watched my wedding on television.
The studio acquired those rights for the cost of tearing up my contract. I was the product being sold in that transaction. The broadcast, the spectacle, the fairy tale going out live across the world, that was the studio extracting its final return on its investment in me. I understood this at some level. I smiled for the cameras because that was what the role required, and I had always been very good at understanding what a role required. And then the last clause, the one that was never written in any contract because it didn't need to be, the one that was simply understood by everyone except, apparently, me. He banned my films in the Principality. Not immediately, not with a formal announcement, but the effect was total. The films I had made, the work I had given my 20s to, the performances that had earned the Oscar, and the international reputation that had made me valuable enough to marry. Those films were not shown in the country where I now lived. My husband's subjects could not watch me work. I could not watch myself work. The version of me that existed on film, the one who was precise and intelligent, and completely in command of her own presence, in a way that I was discovering I was not entirely in command of in a palace, that version was unavailable, locked away, as if the actress had to be erased in order for the princess to be credible. The palace sits on a rock above the Mediterranean. I want you to picture that correctly. Not as a postcard, not as the backdrop for a fairy tale, but as a geographic fact with specific implications. It is a small rock. The entire principality is less than 1 square mile, which means that the social world available to me, the people I would see, the conversations I would have, the rooms I would move through, was extraordinarily limited by any standard, and by the standard of someone who had spent the previous 5 years moving between Philadelphia, New York, Hollywood, and the French Riviera. It was almost incomprehensibly small. I had gone from the most fluid, expansive, possibility-saturated environment on Earth to a rock with a palace and a casino and a population of roughly 20,000 people, the majority of whom, as I said in my own words at the time, did not like me and were watching everything I said and everything I did, waiting for me to fail. The homesickness arrived immediately and never entirely left. I said once, and it was true when I said it and remained true for 26 years, that home was Philadelphia. I never liked to be away too long, but I was always away. That was the condition of the life I had chosen. There was no going back to Philadelphia for a month when the palace became too small, no slipping out to New York for a week when I needed to breathe air that didn't smell of protocol and obligation. I was a princess. I had duties. I had a schedule. I had 142 official titles, which sounds magnificent until you understand that titles are not freedom. They are the opposite of freedom. They are the architecture of obligation, and I had walked into that architecture at 26 years old, and the doors had closed behind me with the quiet finality of a very well-maintained palace gate. The depression came on gradually, then completely. I want to name it clearly because it was real, and it was documented, and it shaped the last 26 years of my life in ways that the official version, the charitable work, the elegant public appearances, the serene composure that became my public identity, was specifically designed to conceal. Close friends saw it. The mood swings, the withdrawal, the specific sadness of someone who has made an irreversible decision and understands its full cost and must perform contentment regardless. I was not always sad. There were genuine pleasures. My children, the gardens, the poetry, the artwork I discovered in my 50s as a late creative outlet. But the thing that had made me most completely myself, the work, the camera, the precise inhabited moment of a performance, that was gone. And the man who had taken me away from it had, within months of our wedding, taken 3 mistresses. I found that out too. I always found things out.
6 years into the marriage, a director came to find me. A director who had made 3 of my films, the best 3, the ones that showed what I could actually do when someone understood how to use what I had. He had a new project, a psychological thriller about a compulsive thief and the man who wants to possess her. Complex, dark, demanding, precisely the kind of material I had been hungry for in the years before The Palace, the kind of role that requires everything an actress has and returns something that cannot be obtained any other way. He wanted me for the title role. He had sought me out specifically, with the specificity of someone who understood exactly what he was asking and exactly what it would mean for me to say yes. I said yes. I want to be very clear about that. I said yes before I said no, and the yes was genuine and immediate in a way that nothing in my palace life had been genuine and immediate since the early months. I accepted the role in March 1962. I announced it publicly. I told the press I would donate my entire fee, $800,000, to local charities, as if the gesture of financial sacrifice might neutralize the political problem of a princess returning to work. It did not neutralize anything. The subjects of the principality, my husband's people, the people I had been performing Serenity for since 1956, reacted with a hostility that was immediate and organized. They did not want their princess playing a disturbed thief on screen. They did not want their princess kissing another man for a camera. They did not, more precisely, want their princess being a person with an interior life and a professional ambition that existed independently of the palace. My husband withdrew his support. The announcement that had gone out from the palace in March was reversed by June. 3 months. That was how long my yes lasted before it became no. The official explanation cited political tensions with a neighboring country, which was real and was genuinely complicated, and which provided a convenient cover for the simpler truth that a princess was not permitted to be an actress, that the role I had accepted at 26 when I married was the only role available to me, and that every script that arrived at that palace, and they arrived, year after year, from directors and studios who had not forgotten what I could do, was functionally burned before I could read it twice. The film was made without me. I watched from the palace as the career I had built and abandoned and tried to reclaim moved on without me, as careers do, as everything does, when you are standing still on a very small rock above the Mediterranean. I want to tell you about the flower pressing, because it's the detail that tells the whole story more efficiently than anything else. In my 50s, I became seriously, devotedly absorbed in the art of pressing flowers and creating collages from them, botanical compositions, intricate arrangements of petals and leaves that I spent hours constructing in the private rooms of the palace. I exhibited them. I was genuinely proud of them. And I understand, looking back, exactly what was happening in those hours. I was a woman who had been one of the most precise,
controlled, technically accomplished performers of her generation, a woman whose entire instrument was the management of attention and presence and the exact calibration of an emotional moment. And she was pressing flowers. Not because pressing flowers is without value, because pressing flowers was what was available. The camera was not available. The set was not available. The director who had made 3 of my best films was not available. What was available was the garden and the quiet rooms and the petals of things that had already bloomed and been cut. The charity work was real, and I want to credit it properly. The Foundation for Young Artists and Performers, the organization for children's rights that achieved consultative status within international bodies. I put genuine attention and genuine feeling into those efforts, and they produced genuine results. But I want to be honest about the specific bitterness of supporting other people's artistic careers when your own has been sealed in a vault. I sat on the board of a film studio in my late 40s, which is the kind of detail that sounds like an achievement and is actually a very precise description of the distance between where I was and where I had been. I was permitted to be adjacent to the industry, permitted to be useful to it in an administrative capacity. The camera was still not available.
What I had instead was poetry. I began giving public readings in the 1970s, touring, performing, standing on stages and speaking words that other people had written, which is a particular kind of acting, and which I did with everything I had, because it was the closest thing available to the work I actually wanted to do. The audiences came. They were kind. And there was always, in those readings, a moment when I felt the old thing, the specific quality of attention that a room gives you when you are fully present in it, when the silence between you and the audience is live rather than dead. And I would think, for just that moment, that I still had it, that it was still there, waiting, that the actress had not been entirely erased by the princess, that somewhere under the 142 titles and the charitable foundations and the pressed flowers and the 26 years of performed serenity, I was still the girl from Philadelphia who had practiced on her dolls and gotten out and made something extraordinary with her hands. She was still there. She just wasn't allowed out very often. I need to tell you about the road from the palace to our country house, a mountain road, winding, the kind that requires complete attention and that I had driven many times without incident. My youngest daughter was in the car. It was September 13th, 1982, a Tuesday afternoon, and I was driving when something happened. The official version says I had a stroke while driving. The car went off a 45-foot embankment. I died the following day at the hospital. I was 52 years old. What I want to say about that road is this. I had been on worse roads. I had navigated worse terrain than a mountain highway I knew by memory. What the stroke means, if it was a stroke, and the evidence suggests it was, is that my body had been carrying something for a long time that finally found its moment to surface. The depression was documented. The isolation was documented. The specific physiological weight of 26 years of suppressed identity and managed grief and the daily performance of a contentment that was partial at best. That is not a small thing to carry. Bodies keep accounts the way banks keep accounts, and they present the bill without warning. My youngest daughter survived with minor injuries. I want to say that clearly because it is the most important fact of that afternoon. She walked away. Everything else about that day is complicated and contested and shadowed by the specific grief of an early death that the world processed as tragedy, while I would process it, if I could, as something more like the end of a very long negotiation. I had negotiated for 26 years, with the palace, with the protocol, with the man who had needed a Hollywood actress to save his country, and had saved his country, and had then required the actress to disappear so the princess could be credible.
The negotiation ended on a mountain road on a Tuesday afternoon. I was 52 years old. I had given everything I earned to get in, and I never found a way to get back out. Here is what survived. The films, 11 of them, made in 5 years, between 1951 and 1956, before the palace gates closed. They survived because film survives, because the studio system that underpaid me and processed me and sold my wedding to the world for broadcast rights was also, incidentally, in the business of preservation. You can watch them now. The thrillers, the comedies, the dramatic pictures. The work is there, completely, exactly as it was. The precision, the intelligence, the specific quality of attention that my director understood better than anyone, and that I understood about myself from the time I was a child in Philadelphia giving voices to dolls. That version of me is perfectly preserved. Frozen at 26, exactly as I was in the last year before the palace. The actress is in the archive. She always will be. What did not survive, what was actively prevented from surviving, is everything that should have come after. The films I didn't make, the collaboration that was announced and then retracted, the roles that arrived at the palace year after year, from directors who had not forgotten and were turned away year after year by a protocol that had no category for a princess who was also a working actress. The career that should have run from 1951 to 1982, 30 years of work, is instead a 5-year window followed by 26 years of absence. That absence is not accidental. It was constructed, maintained, enforced by the specific requirements of a marriage that needed me to be one thing and could not accommodate the thing I actually was.
What I want you to take from this is not the fairy tale and not the tragedy. Both of those framings flatten what actually happened into something more comfortable than the truth. What I want you to take is the arithmetic. I paid $2 million, every dollar I ever earned, to enter a life that cost me everything I had worked to build. I was underpaid throughout my Hollywood career because I was a woman. Then I gave what I was underpaid away as a dowry. I tried to come back once, publicly, with my fee already donated to charity, and was stopped by a husband who needed the princess more than he needed the person. I pressed flowers in a palace on a rock above the Mediterranean and gave poetry readings to stay connected to the work that had made me, and I left this world at 52 on a road I knew by heart. The films are in the archive. The actress who should have made 30 years of them is not. That is the precise and complete account of what was lost. I would like it on the record. So now you have the version that the palace never released. Not the fairy tale, the account. The $2 million. The banned films. The 3 mistresses within months. The scripts that arrived and were returned. The one public attempt to come back, the fee already donated, reversed in 3 months because a princess is not permitted to also be a person with a career. I want to ask you something before you go, something I want you to sit with rather than move past. How many women do you know who made themselves smaller to fit a life that was presented to them as an enlargement, who paid everything they had for something that cost everything they were, who performed contentment so consistently and so well that the performance became the only version anyone could see? The industry I left at 26 paid me $5,000 for a film it sold to the world. My male co-star received $18,750 for the same work. When I won the Oscar the following year, I was considered to have been adequately compensated for the discrepancy. When I married and transferred my entire fortune to a royal house as a dowry, that was considered romantic. When I tried to come back 6 years later, fee donated, publicly announced,
and was stopped by a husband who needed the image more than he needed me, that was considered a private matter. All of it, the underpayment, the dowry, the banned films, the returned scripts, the depression that ran beneath the composure for 26 years, all of it was considered, by everyone with the authority to consider it, simply the way things were. The price of the fairy tale. The cost of the rock above the Mediterranean. I left this world at 52 on a road I knew by heart. My youngest daughter was in the car and walked away, which is the only part of that afternoon I care about. The films are in the archive. The actress who should have made 30 more years of them is not. What I want you to do with that information is refuse the fairy tale. Not just mine, but the ones being offered to you right now. The ones that ask you to pay in advance without showing you the full invoice. Ask to see the invoice. Ask what the banned films clause looks like. Ask who benefits when you make yourself smaller. I asked too late. You don't have to. Share this, talk about it, and come back, because there are more stories where this one came from, and every one of them has an invoice that nobody showed the woman before she signed.